Hi, I'm Bree Smith,
And I'm Kate Chafers.
and we're your hosts for the Midlife Academy podcast. Our podcast is for those at midlife and beyond who are exploring what's next with purpose.
And welcome to our first episode. In this episode, we're going to give you some background about the Midlife Academy podcast and why we're hosting it.
With this podcast, we'll explore all things midlife, like navigating life's big transitions, career reinvention, rethinking retirement, and rediscovering purpose. We'll invite a variety of guests to explore these topics with us. So let's get started. So Kate, I'm curious just to hear why you were interested in starting the Midlife Academy at the University of Minnesota.
You know, Bree, I've worked in this space for over 20 years. I've worked as a career counselor, as a leadership coach, as someone who helped people with the retirement process. And one of the things that I have found across all of these, including as a researcher, by the way, but one of the things I found across all of these is that it's not easy to navigate midlife. And there's a lot of reasons why that's true. I mean, we look at life stage and what's going on in those midlife years. People shift careers, there's a lot of family pressures, caregiving demands, and people are often ready to recalibrate, but they often have to do it themselves. And I do think that a university is an ideal place for us to explore this issue because universities are places where, whether you're 18 or you're 50 or you're 65, we have the infrastructure and the resources that can help people navigate and find new direction in their lives.
So here, I want to ask right off the bat, we're throwing around this term Midlife Academy, using this word midlife, and I want to know what you think we mean by midlife.
Yeah, this is really early stages when we think about it as researchers about what we mean by midlife. And I think it's a fluid concept because not everyone uses the same age ranges or life stages to describe it. Generally speaking, most people who are doing research in this space define midlife as sometime between 40 and 65, but we know that within that age range, there's also a lot of nuances of what's happening in people's lives. And so some researchers break it down further and look at early midlife as being your 40s and midlife as being in your 50s and late midlife as being in your 60s. I think the important thing is we're talking about the Midlife Academy, Brie, is I think we want to talk about like what are some common themes across all of these different stages, but then we also want to look at what is unique within each of those decades. And so we want to be able to serve the people who are coming with different situations across all of those decades.
And I'm just going to just jump in there. I think that's what really excites me, that we might have folks coming to midlife for many different reasons. Maybe they are dealing with shifting family relationships and caregiving, and someone else at the Midlife Academy is dealing with a career shift, but maybe has previously gone through that kind of stage of midlife transitions. So the ways, folks are coming from different kind of points in this midlife journey that can also learn so much from each other, from those who have, been through a certain phase or certain questions that they are kind of facing at their moment in that kind of larger midlife space.
And we do imagine the Midlife Academy to be a place where people can come and have their needs met, but then also come back when
Mhm.
their lives shift. And inevitably, their lives are going to shift. And so, if someone's adjusting to being an empty nester and looking at what are the possibilities now that my role has shifted as a parent, we want the Midlife Academy to be the place to come. If someone's looking at figuring out an alternative to retirement, that is going to be more meaningful, we want people to come to the Midlife Academy. Or we also want people to find their needs met if they're in their 40s and they're looking at recareering, because, oftentimes people come to this life stage realizing that they're going to be working longer and they want work that is going to be sustainable, that they can continue to do in their 50s and 60s. And so I do think the way that we're structuring this is we have chunked some components of the Midlife Academy into shorter courses where people can come and they can build the experience that's most meaningful for them and then come back as their needs shift.
And I'm really excited to hear that, and I really love that shorter commitment, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I'm thinking of my kind of age cohort of old millennials, in our 40s, as you're referencing there, maybe at this point where one's been in a career for 2 decades and is feeling kind of stuck, but not in a place perhaps due to like family obligations to, like take on like a master's program or a PhD program or law school, but looking for something that can kind of give that structure to start to imagine what that next step might be in a community of other folks, at various phases in their life, but also kind of starting to ask that question and to do so in that environment where we're just starting to explore.
Yeah, and we do see it as helping people have some similarities across our short courses. So we're always going to be doing this in a cohort approach, meaning that our point is to build community around this, to bring people together and normalize this process and have people think through what their ideas are, bounce ideas off of others, to also explore and grow in a way that is meaningful, that's got some guidance around it, but also with a lot of space to explore. And the university, with the way that we are structured, we have so many opportunities for people to take things to the next level and explore additional direction. But we wanted to chunk this in a way, like you said, busy professionals are often time constrained. And so having people come for shorter bites of this versus committing to, let's say, a 9-month program where people need to carve out a huge chunk of their lives, we want them to be able to do this in a building block way. So, Brie, I do want to ask you, because we are focusing on midlife and we've talked about just how broad that concept is, but what kinds of things, what themes do you see out there about just what are kinds of the things that people are dealing with at midlife?
Absolutely. So I think, you've kind of started to hit on some of these, but when we think about these more broadly, I think we're seeing shifting family relationships. And I think there's a lot of studies to show this, that we have kind of a shifting landscape of parenting and grandparenting and caregiving that can maybe, extend longer than previously one had thought or in previous kind of generations. But we also, in this kind of shifting family relationships, we have this kind of like moment of children growing up, of the so-called empty nest, and that kind of moment of transition that I've talked to a lot of folks who are kind of at that point looking for purpose. I think we also see this as a stage when health and wellness are kind of taking a high profile in our lives, starting to feel our bodies age, and like ways in which aging is facing us in new ways, where health and wellness can become something we want to prioritize more in our life. But once again, come up against 24 hours in a day where we have all of these, other kind of obligations, but want to find some way to kind of change and shift priorities and have health and wellness be a part of that. And this is also a time when careers are shifting, whether that is, an early midlife kind of moment where one's looking for a career shift, or where perhaps someone is starting to think about retirement, and or, what retirement might mean from them. Perhaps retiring from one's, main career and shifting into other forms of work or volunteerism, and finding some kind of balance between, perhaps that kind of part of one's life alongside other kind of lifestyle desires, desires for travel, all of these kind of other parts of life that make our lives meaningful, and trying to understand like how all these different pieces work together. Often all of these are happening at once, which is really quite a lot to juggle and to kind of parse out. So I think, Midlife Academy offering space to maybe even just acknowledge like all of these kind of overlapping shifts and changes happening at once, to kind of see it all in this kind of bigger picture, to get a better sense for, where one wants to go next.
Mhm. And I do think you touched on this, but just also that sense of wanting our lives to be meaningful and not just all about work. I mean, I do think there is a shift that happens, early in our career. Oftentimes, we're so focused on success. And as we get older, I think we realize that not only is success a moving target, but it's also not always tied with what is important to us. It's a process of thinking about, people have used the term from success to significance. They're just, wanting to think about what matters to us and what impact do we want to have in the world. The psychologist Eric Erickson used the term generativity as being an important part of that midlife process of trying to think about how are we going to leave the world a better place? What is the legacy we're leaving? And so thinking about those bigger questions about what kind of work is meaningful to me, what is purposeful, and how do I live my life in an authentic, purposeful way. And I think that is one of the shifts that happen at midlife that people oftentimes really need to spend some time with, because those are big questions, kind of existential questions too. And I will say too, when we talk purpose, we don't talk big P, like you don't have to like change the world, but it is like that sense of satisfaction that comes from what is truly meaningful in living your life so that you are focused on those things that are really meaningful. And Bree, I do think we offer a course around purpose. Could you tell us a little bit about that one?
Absolutely. So hearing all these words you're saying, meaningful purpose, like this is exactly what lies behind our fall course, which we titled Cultivating Purpose. And this is really an opportunity for participants to gain clarity about what's important to them. And so while we're doing this in a community, like I think this is also, will be a very kind of personal moment of reflection for all those taking part in the class, while also gaining access to tools that will then help one kind of take those first steps forward towards pursuing that which has been identified as, like that source of, starting to achieve and cultivate that purpose. So this may involve really, once one kind of sits down and understands what are these kind of hopes and dreams for the future, it might be exploring some very different identities than one is like inhabiting in their day job. And recognizing perhaps like a mismatch between where you are and where you want to be. So really kind of understanding how that purpose could fit within your life goals or setting goals for the future, and really insisting on folks carving out time and space to explore possibilities. I think that's just huge here. Once again, everyone is so busy and our minds are often so cluttered with all that we're juggling to find that space, to find that place to really sit down and explore what those possibilities are. And to do so in our Cultivating Purpose class, to do so and connect with a community of learners who are on a similar journey, I think is just really what really makes this stand out and what makes the Midlife Academy stand out. You're doing so in conversation with others who are on their own journeys. As we do so, as you say, it's not a big P purpose. This can be small steps, but those small steps can lead one on that path to kind of achieving that kind of beautiful vision that we hope to see folks starting to develop in the course of their time with the Midlife Academy in this particular course.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Bree. And I'd like to unpack that. You mentioned just about doing this in a group, in a cohort. Why do you think it's so important that we have these conversations not only with ourselves, but also with others in a community? Like, what's the big impact of a community as we go through this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've taught in many different environments. I teach online in the classroom, and there is just really nothing that compares to what is possible in a learning community and the types of connections and kind of the spark of ideas and inspiration, feedback and support that can happen in a community of learners. And particular to the Midlife Academy program, I think even just collecting these participants in a room and everyone seeing who's there, seeing that they're not alone, in kind of raising their hand and saying, I want to take this time to cultivate purpose in my life. And to know that they're in a room of others who have signed up for that opportunity as well. I think that group together can really offer that kind of motivation and accountability to set that as your goal and meet that goal of starting to take those first steps, which can be a lot more difficult if you're trying to go it alone, saying, I'm going to read this article and, like do all these things individually. Certainly, there's all kinds of great resources out there to do so, but to do so within the kind of structure of the Midlife Academy and the connections, resources, conversations that take place here, I think is just like an immense opportunity to benefit from the ideas and presence and stories and challenges of others. That is really something that doesn't compare to the kind of solo journey of this path.
And I've noticed too, so in the work I've done as a career counselor, just like you with teaching, I do think that that process of meeting with others, of talking with others, can really spark new ideas as well as new connections. And so we know when we manage our careers, it helps not only to find a direction we want, but then also to build connections and pathways into that. And I think too, for a lot of people, the old models of how we thought about careers just don't fit with the lived experiences of today's people. So, when a lot of us entered the workplace for the first time, I think we anticipated linear careers, right? So, you enter a career and you might get promoted and you might shift around a bit, but we might have thought that our careers would take us one direction and we prepared for that. And we all know that very few of us have realized that kind of a career path. And so for most of us, we are zigging and zagging. And part of that is because the workplace and just the whole context of work has shifted, the way we work has shifted. But part of it is also because for a lot of us, we're not staying at the same company for years and years. We're not staying in the same career. Careers are less predictable, they're more likely to shift. I think about when I entered my field, we didn't use tools like we do today. I mean, I am old enough to say I was in the part of the population that had to learn email for the first time. Now we're looking at AI. So the workplace is not static and our careers are flexible and we have to zig and zag. And people have to actively manage their careers. But part of that is also finding those places where careers are fitting our needs and not just that we're moving haphazardly into whatever path the river takes, wherever the river is taking us. So we not only have to manage it, but we also have to steer it. And I think that's a really important thing, again, to do it in community. It can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And there I'm thinking of the power of mentors who maybe are a few steps ahead of one where they can, identify a path that one would not have even imagined, or to show the viability of a path that may seem like too vulnerable or risky that like a mentor or another, member of this kind of learning community can lend insight into. Now, I mean, what you're describing about careers kind of also seems to ring true for me about retirement trends as well.
Absolutely, too. So people are not necessarily looking for or can afford leisure retirements. Part of this comes from the concept that, we know we're living longer. And so, today, if you reach age 65, for a man, he can typically expect to, and this is on average, but on average, live another 18.2 years. For a woman, another 20.7 years. That's a long time of retirement. And people think about how can they afford that, for one thing, to fund a leisure retirement. But another is people are also feeling like there's a desire to continue to work in some capacity. But what they often find is that their current jobs or careers just don't fit the lifestyle that they want. And maybe also they don't need to earn the same income that maybe they had to earn earlier in their careers. And so there's a little bit more flexibility in being able to craft work and fit it into a lifestyle that makes sense. And we're seeing more and more people approaching the retirement years with this attitude of it's going to be work in some capacity. It's going to be a next chapter. There was an interesting study a couple of years ago that Edward Jones did, and they found that 55%, so more than half of people, were not wanting a leisure retirement. They were looking at retirement as launching a next chapter. And so different ways of working, or maybe retooling to work in a different kind of job that is going to fit our lifestyles. Maybe getting some new degrees, new certificates, exploring new directions. All of these are on the table as we think about retirement. And so it's not just removing oneself from the workplace, it's finding work that fits with the lifestyle. And Bree, I'm sure you've seen this in the classroom because you have taught people who are non-traditional students coming back to school. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen?
Yeah, so I teach a writing class for an online extension school. And this is a class that enables one to get into a master's program. And so I'm often having students that maybe are still working a day job and coming to this evening course, really dedicating themselves to coming back to academic writing, but all in the hopes of pursuing this master's degree. I also have many retired folks that where their kind of career life is in the past, but absolutely, like you said previously, they are taking on this dream of getting a master's degree in history. And my class is the first step. And so I'm always just like so excited about the kind of community of learners that are non-traditional students coming from many different, backgrounds, maybe previous careers, who are just so stoked at this opportunity to dive in and pursue this kind of larger goal for this master's degree. But what I really enjoy about this experience is how much I see the learners benefiting from the insights of their peers, hearing from each other about the struggles they're having, the challenges are having, and how much I like to kind of create that space for everyone to start to kind of build trust in the room where they feel comfortable being vulnerable, identifying like certain things that they're insecure about. But through that process of sharing with the group, coming out at the end, confident writers, enthusiastic about this kind of academic path they've chosen for themselves. And in this case, I think this is a great example of one group that identified this goal and have identified how kind of pursuing this goal for enrichment in this way is absolutely kind of bringing them some kind of satisfaction or fulfillment that perhaps they were no longer achieving or receiving in their day jobs or their kind of main careers. So I think it's like a really inspiring example of the kind of rejuvenation that can come from identifying that what's next, taking those steps. And in this case, I have just so much respect for everyone who's really kind of putting themselves out there into this kind of vulnerable space. Many of them who have not been in a classroom for decades, who are coming back in, but also just like really committing themselves to being a part of the learning community.
I'm really struck with that too, Bree, because I do think that a lot of times we tend to just think about, what's next as being kind of a career thing. And what we're talking about is creating a life that has meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And for some people, that may be adding a component of a dream and, a dream maybe of going to graduate school and studying history or, which may or may not be vocational in nature. I mean, it may be avocational, but it's that sense of reward that people get from it that's really important. And I think the work that we're doing with the Midlife Academy has built in a lot of the flexibility to allow people, whether they're looking at a career change or whether they're looking at recalibrating all of these pieces of their lives in a meaningful way, whether they're looking at like, who am I now that I'm not a caregiver anymore and so much of my energy went into this, or who am I now that I'm not, whatever your role is, whatever your occupation is. But it may also be just, I really want to live a fulfilled life and there's something that I've wanted to do and want to grow in that way. And that's another great way to do it. And again, in higher ed, we can help connect people with some of these resources. So as we wrap up, Bree, I think let's step back and say, like, what do we hope? What is your hope for the Midlife Academy? What do you hope that we are creating here?
That's a great question. I have so many hopes, Kate, but I mean, part of what I'm hoping is for this kind of midlife stage and this space for kind of learning and growing in midlife to be fun as well, to not be, this like kind of old cliche of the midlife crisis, to dispense with that and to imagine the Midlife Academy as inviting participants into this moment of reflection, of kind of reimagining one's life, of kind of getting off autopilot in a sense, and then taking this opportunity to imagine like where one could go in their next chapter. I'm also just like really excited that this is part of the University of Minnesota and kind of serving to kind of normalize this idea that as a public university, we are university for the people of Minnesota. This is not just like for the 18 to 22-year-olds, rather this is for all, and that we are committed to being an age-friendly university. And I think this Midlife Academy is just like a shining example of what that looks like in practice.
That's terrific. And I wholeheartedly agree that, this is a population that is underserved everywhere. And so, universities do a great job with the 18 to 22-year-olds with graduate education. We do a good job too with helping people pivot and, retool for different career roles, certificate programs, helping people develop the skill sets they need to continue to grow in their jobs. And then we also have lifelong learning at our universities for people 50 plus that are looking at enrichment learning. But this piece of the puzzle of that age range, that midlife, it is a significant life stage that is often minimized not only in higher ed, but just in research across the board. And so by giving it its due and recognizing what's unique about it, I do think we can see a lot of potential with it. My hope is that we can build a community and a place where people can make meaningful changes in their lives, where they can come together and figure things out and recognize that they don't have to do this all by themselves, to help people get the courage to make some of these shifts, to be inspired by others, and to recognize that we are here at those pivot points in your lives. You can come to us and we can help you navigate them. We can help you figure it out. We can help you take those small steps and step into what's next so that you can actually build this life that you're hoping for. And that's really what I hope for. I hope that the Midlife Academy can be here as people launch their best chapters yet. So, Bree, we're looking forward to connecting with you on this podcast. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I'll just float that we'll have an incoming batch of guests to the podcast joining us in kind of discussing these themes in greater depth. And we look forward to kind of continuing this conversation, perhaps as a means to get you all to start thinking about what's next might be, what your next steps might be, and how the Midlife Academy could really kind of serve as just a fantastic resource to help you take that first step.
And also just add our website is midlife.umn.edu. You can sign up for our email list and we will keep you updated on what's going on. And we hope to see you on future podcasts as well as check out our courses we're offering. Thank you so much. Bye.